Hey everyone, I'm Rick Becker, host of the Irish Baseball Podcast, joined today by author Christian Sheppard. Christian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, your book, The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball. I gotta ask, so what's this book?
Well, the book was it's a I think I touch upon the notion that I think all of your listeners and all baseball fans would know, which is why do we care so much? Like what's in this game? Why is it that when things happen in a game that's made for seemingly children, why do adults cry and scream and show emotions that they don't allow themselves in the real world? So I asked myself the question, like, what does it mean? And I was especially equipped for that because I'm a professor of religion and literature. Basically, I've spent my life studying these, great systems of ideas and meaning making. And when I asked myself, what does baseball mean? I came up with this comparison. The subtitle of the book is Lessons for Life from Homer's Odyssey to the World Series. And it's this idea that baseball has in it this epic, heroic vision that we see these players on the field in the same way that the ancient Greeks saw Odysseus in their stories or Achilles in their stories. And they for our sake, they accomplish these great feats that we point to and say, "Ah, that is awesome. That is excellent. Let me do things in my life the way that, you know, Mookie Betts does everything on the field."
So, that's a really interesting point you make. I'm going to say that one of my favorite t-shirts that I own I got at the Babe Ruth birthplace and museum. And the t shirt says, at one point, he wanted to become a priest. He settled for becoming a god.
Yeah.
So we, even back to the 20s and before that, we have that link between religious and spiritual imagery that we have put onto the game. And it happens a little bit in other sports, but why do you think it happens so much more in baseball? Is there something about the history of the game? Is there something about the nature of the game that really does have that spiritual aspect? Movies like Field of Dreams, and you don't get movies like that really about other sports.
No, about football, you're right. I mean, it's interesting. I think that that's totally true. I think that on my book tour in this past year, I made a special point to stop off in Baltimore and drop off a copy at the Babe Ruth Museum, just so they had it, and I cover. And it was great to see like Ruth's baseball bat from when he was, one of the orphans. I think it was like St. Mary's or something like that. There is a sense of making of for fans of the game making pilgrimages to certain spots. It's important to actually go to the game and be there. I think that baseball tugs at our, for lack of a better word, souls in ways that other sports don't, because of how it's grown with America, and as a consequence, how baseball fandom spans generations. And so it's something that religious feelings are collective. The great scholar of religion, Emil Durkheim, defined religion as collective effervescence, like this feeling that you have all together. And when that feeling reverberates through not only yourself, but you think of your parents, then you think of your kids, and you think of your friends. It reverberates throughout in a way that, maybe someday, football will catch up. I mean, it's obviously eclipsed all the other sports in America in terms of, eyeballs on the screen. But there's something about baseball that since the time of Ruth, it became the national pastime, and then since then went through these phases, whether of integration with Jackie Robinson or immigration with someone like DiMaggio, or even as the in the '70s when you have players like Ricky Henderson, and you see money moving around and things like that. Throughout all of that, baseball has persisted, and um, I think that the fact that baseball fandom is often local. For baseball, no one watches every baseball game. All of baseball is mediated through your local team. You know what I mean? And so the world of baseball through your local team. And it just so happens the games go spring, summer, and if you're lucky, fall. And there are so many more of them, and you encounter them on the radio and on television and live, and then hopefully through books. Um, I just think it permeates our, our minds or our consciousness, our attention in a way that other sports haven't and don't yet.
And I do think when you make mention of how, yes, football has eclipsed baseball in total numbers of viewers, right? But one of the areas where baseball really is superior, and even with all the rule changes and the ghost runner and the designated hitter and all of those different rules that have changed the game and have updated and modernized the game, if you watch a baseball game in 2026, it's going to look not that much different from a baseball game that you watched in 1986 or 1966 or 1946. The players might be way more muscular. They might hit the ball a lot further. They might hit the ball a lot harder. There might be analytics. All of these things have changed. But when you watch a football game from 2026 and you just go back and watch Joe Montana and Dan Marino and John Elway, it looks like a whole different game.
Yeah.
And I think that that is when you connect it with religion and with being passed down through your family. The fact that what Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani are doing looks so very similar to what Reggie Jackson was doing when he was my father's favorite player, to what Mickey Mantle did when he was his father's favorite player. And that is something that I don't think gets maybe appreciated enough.
Yeah, that's great. I agree with that. That's a great point. Because my grandfather, saw Babe Ruth play at Fenway Park. My dad's favorite player was Ted Williams. And when I pass on those stories to my kids, to my son, to my daughter, um, it means something because they can imagine they can evoke in those places. When I take them back to see my mom back in Boston, I take them to Fenway and they experience that. And at Wrigley too. That's where Babe Ruth pointed and called the shot, that legend of whether or not it occurred. And that to think that Sammy Sosa was hitting balls out of the park down onto Waveland Avenue at different points. It gives you shivers across time. So there's that historical aspect to it. I agree, and I think it's exciting. That's why this when I was listing the ages of baseball from Ruth through free agency, I think we are in this time of Ohtani now, where things are different. It's very exciting to think of something unprecedented occurring. And then at the same time, because I watch like a lot, I'm sure you too, I watch a lot of baseball games. There is that old saw. It's like every time you go to the park, you see something new. And it's like true. At this point, I just go like waiting for me to like see something I've never, see just everything I've always seen. But it's not. There's always something that happens. That Abner Doubleday came up with a devious contrivance to keep our attentions perpetually curious.
And just getting back to that point that we were making, like I even think of basketball, and when people have their greatest of all time conversations. And there will be players like Kevin Durant and LeBron James and Steph Curry who are playing right now that will make it into those lists. And you hardly ever think of going back to even now, Oscar Robertson barely shows up on them anymore. Like the game has changed so much. But in baseball, if you're putting together a greatest of all time list, you might have one guy who played in the last, you might have Bonds on there, you might have Otani on there, but it's going to be made up of people stretching from the turn of the 20th century until now. And it's probably going to be a fairly even section or cross section of those players, unless you're really biased towards when you were a kid, which a lot of people do as well.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, I'm biased. As someone who's lived in Chicago now for a while, the GOAT conversation always makes me laugh because it's like obviously Michael Jordan is the greatest player I've ever seen do anything. But I also think about Michael Jordan as I love the fact that he took a year off to play baseball, right? And then he was like a minor leaguer who they let play in the majors. Like it was a humbling experience for the greatest. And I think there's something about a lot of kids played little league, they played baseball, and so when they feel like when they see when you see one of these fastballs that are there now, you know how hard that would be to hit. Or even I was with a buddy of mine at the game, and there was a can of corn came up just a foul ball, and he said to me, "How confident are you that you would be able to catch that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, not that confident, right?" And if I ever in the average pop out that happens, I'd be bragging, for years about having hit a ball that far. So I love the admiration for the players and that question, that sort of like bar room question of who's the greatest, how do you rank this, that, and the other thing. I think there's something essential about that. This is something I try to get at in the book, this kind of like search for excellence. Like those barroom conversations are born of this natural no this natural desire to see something just done perfectly well, and to be able to see players now and see Otani hit it now and think, wow, that's pretty great, and we're kind of like excited and blessed to live in the time of his performing. And at the same time, he doesn't necessarily have to win. I mean, the Blue Jays gave him a pretty good run for the money this year, right? And the other that's another aspect of baseball. With MJ being the GOAT in basketball, you can have one guy dominate, but in baseball you can't. It's teams. And I start my book talking about when I was a kid, Reggie Jackson being, you know, compared to Ruth as Mr. October, and there are these performances, but the penultimate chapter of the book talks about the Red Sox winning the World Series, and the play there was Dave Roberts and his steal, like a guy who's got at the deadline just to come in and pinch run somehow changes the momentum and the entire myth and the minds of everyone living in Boston because he just did what he everyone knew he was there to do, which was to steal the bag, and he did, right? And so you can just have one person kind of like become part of that whole story, which I love.
Getting back to Jordan playing baseball for a second, and you talk about seeing a game at Wrigley Field and thinking that's where Ruth had his called shot in the World Series. Well, that's also where Michael Jordan played with the White Sox in a spring training game against the Cubs and had a double. Like,
Yeah,
you think of two players who are arguably, we can say arguably because I'm not going to get into a basketball debate with anybody today, but arguably the goats of their particular sports, and they both had a big moment at this one venue. And I think that might be something else that gives us this feeling about baseball is that, even the Boston Garden is gone,
I know.
the Forum is gone. Like the legendary basketball venues are all updated now. The Spectrum is gone in Philadelphia. And in football, I guess we have Lambeau still, but besides Lambeau, and Soldier Field is still Soldier Field, but it looks a whole lot different than it
Yeah,
did.
they're moving, and they used to play at Dick Butkus played a couple games at Wrigley. You know what I mean? Like the Bears played at Wrigley Field at one point. You're right. The venues and there's a the every basketball court's the same, every hockey rink's the same, every football is, but every baseball field is not the same, and they are different. I had in my book tour this year, I kind of went across the country, and for the first time, I went to Dodger Stadium, and I didn't know what to think going in, but it was like going to Mecca in a way. I mean, that was kind of another one of these awesome places that. And there are just a few of them, That's why I recommend anyone get a chance wherever you go, try to go to see the different ballpark because it's a lot of fun, and it's fun just to see how the you kind of go down memory lane when you go to another team's ballpark 'cause you see what jerseys they're wearing and you see, oh yeah, that's their, that's their player, that's their hero, which is different than, in Chicago we always have it's like, Ron Santo and Ernie Banks and now Rizzo and Bryant and Maddox and things like this, but in other places there are other players.
I wonder if, because of the venues like Wrigley, like Fenway, like Dodger Stadium, that have been around for decades and decades and decades, and that sort of has that cathedral feel that does have that connection to religion, where the newer venues in other sports, yes, they are technologically amazing and they might have retractable roofs and you can play in inclement weather and all those things. But there's something about, especially those venues that are really old, but even not that old, like Camden Yards. I remember when Camden Yards open to the public. It still feels like a new ballpark to me,
Yeah.
but for a lot of people, that's the only place they remember the Orioles playing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you get the connection to these venues as much as, if not more than honestly, I've said that the difference between Chicago baseball fans is White Sox fans are fans of the White Sox and Cubs fans are fans of Wrigley.
There's a side to that. I think maybe there's some truth. There's definitely some truth to that. Actually, the food's better at the White Sox, at the White Sox ballpark. But in recent times, the quality of the play has been better at Wrigley Field. I think there's another aspect of baseball that you're touching on too. Even in these new parks. If even if there's new parks, there's something utopian about the ball game and the green expanse of a field in the city. We have this legend of Abner Doubleday, in the Elysium Fields creating the game, but that's really just like a legend. It's but that legend has a truth to it in that baseball has always been pastoral. Like when you look at the diaries of Walt Whitman back in the 19th century, he's describing boys playing the game like in Manhattan, right? And I think there's an aspect of the magic that we're talking about, and I'll do experiences at Wrigley and at Fenway and at any place where the ballpark in San Francisco, in LA, any place where the ballpark is like in the city and it's surrounded by city, and then you go into a place that just has this gratuitous open grass field where people are supposed to play. And I think that's where kind of like this pastoral vision of the beauty of the game kind of you can't help but be romantic about it. And especially another difference that we haven't really talked about in terms of baseball versus other sports is it's not timed. So you get a sense that it could last forever. It's a summer day. It has that just kind of like not a care in the world feel that the other games don't have.
Absolutely. So, what was the impetus for this book? What was the spark that came where you said, okay, I've got to get this down here?
Yeah, so there's actually a specific a specific thing occurred. I was studying for my PhD in religion at the University of Chicago, and my wife and I had our first child, our daughter, and I was all but dissertation. My wife's maternity leave was over. She went back to work, and because I had like no excuse, I was taking care of the baby during the day, and I was taking this perambulator, and if you're up into the south side of Chicago where the University of Chicago is, it's kind of like Hogwarts in the middle of the city. It's this gothic place with gargoyles looking down and everything like this. And I'm pushing my way out of the divinity school. And one of my fellow students sort of like walks out of the shadows, smoking a cigarette, and says, "So how are you going to raise it?" Like pointing to my child, right? Which is not a question you ever like encounter in the world. Like, how are you going to raise your child? She meant like religiously. Are you going to teach her about, Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or Hindu, like all the things that we study at the divinity school. And I just kind of quipped, being like the wise guy that I was. I said, "I'm going to raise her a Cubs fan." Right? Like that was the answer. And then I was like, uh-huh, what would it mean if all the questions that we ask of all these religions, which are basically like, what is the world and how should we live in it? Like, how should we pursue happiness? What would it mean if we asked those questions of baseball, of the ball game? So for a long time, this book's subtitle, I used to call it Cecilia's Cubs because my daughter's name is Cecilia. And also as a consequence, I mean, I lived on the north side of Chicago. I was supposed to be writing my dissertation. I actually eventually did. But when I was quote unquote taking care of her, I took her to Wrigley Field like almost every single day. I got season tickets. We would just sit there and, I'd be reading. We'd get there early. We'd stay late. And it was like this idyllic moment. So the comparisons that I make in the book between, it's not a memoir or a fan's memoir really, but I make these comparisons between like classic moments in baseball and classic moments in myth, and they're punctuated by these little anecdotes of taking this baby, little baby daughter to the ball game. And I also think that there's a difference when you sort of ask these questions in an academic sense and when you actually formulate them as a parent, um, in terms of your child. Because even though I was just kidding, I also really wanted to think like, how can I set up this child so she's happy? Like that's the thing you want most as a parent. You want your child's happiness. So I was asking like a serious question of, what is this world and how should we live? And I was pleased that baseball gave me answers that, rewarded all my quote unquote research at Wrigley.
That is such a funny story and a great story. I think of when I was a baby and all the pictures that we have from me before maybe the age of 5 or 6, I'm wearing Yankees gear. Because my father was this huge, I mentioned Reggie Jackson, right? Like my father was this huge Yankees fan. And then when I started to follow baseball around the age of, 6, 7, when you really start to get into it, I'm assuming it's because I was a rebellious child and I gravitated right to Wade Boggs and the Red Sox, right? And that was where I went. And when you think about the how are you going to raise her, I'm going to raise her as a Cubs fan. The fandoms do sort of have that same connection that your religious affiliation would have, right? Like when it's time to rebel, instead of, being like, "Oh no, I'm an atheist," or, "I'm going to study Buddhism." It's like, "No, I'm going to be a Red Sox fan
Yeah.
because my father was a Yankees fan," right? And then sometimes it is just passed down directly, and, you know, you're an Irish Catholic, and that means as much to you as being a Red Sox fan in South Boston, right?
Yeah.
It's that same connection. And I think it is more a part of our identity, your fandom in baseball, than your fandom in some of these other sports, especially a sport that is so individually player focused like basketball. You know, you could have been a diehard Bulls fan and then Jordan left, and it was just like, well, what do we do now, right?
Yeah.
and you just sort of lose that interest because one player can make such a huge difference. But in baseball, even when your team is in a rebuilding year or rebuilding mode, you're still going to the ballpark, you're still catching the games. Maybe you don't watch them all on television, but you're still probably going to a couple every year and you're enjoying it in that way. Is that another way that you kind of see baseball fandom and spirituality connecting? Is this it's something that is familial, but it's also something that is more of a part of our personality,
I
your
think it becomes
baseball fandom. Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that completely. And personally, I have a little section in my book called a little. There's a subchapter there called "The Chicken Man," and it's about Wade Boggs and how um, you know, kind of anecdotally, my grandmother, she was very ill for a long time, and I spent a lot of time with her. And spending time with her meant watching the Red Sox and specifically her hero, Wade Boggs. It was always my Wade. And so she was like this great appreciation for Wade Boggs. And she was a very pious person. Like if she wasn't watching, she wasn't going to church, she was watching the Red Sox or like watching a cooking show or something like that. And the I think it's a bunch there's almost like there are too many different reasons for why this is true, but they all point to the same thing is that because there are so many games and it takes enough time that in each game like tells a story and there's an inherent even if your team is bad and the Cubs have been bad for a long time and the Red Sox they would never win it for such a long time there's still the suspense that they might win that game or her Wade and here more likely would get a hit that at bat, right? And that would reward you. And so there's these players and the teams and the seasons are something that there's enough time, there's enough friction for them to wear their way into your identity, right? For it to become part of you. I mean, what would summer be without the games on the radio or without even like for me especially when I was a kid I had like the baseball cards and then we would sometimes if I'd have to go to bed it was my bedtime and I couldn't stay up if it was too late but when in the morning I'd read in the paper like what had happened and try to recreate it and I'd go to the game with my dad and he'd be keeping the scorecard and afterwards we'd take the scorecard home as like a relic of what happened and then my buddies and I we would play foil ball we'd take all of our tinfoil from our lunches, and we would play in the streets because I sort of grew up in Boston, and we would actually play in the streets, and we would like recreate what happened during the games. And so there's a way in which it's very much like these ancient myths. I had a great experience traveling to Italy a while ago in this archaeological dig, and I saw them dig up these they're these funeral urns of ancient Etruscans. Now, the Etruscans were like peoples like the Romans, like the Greeks, and they had pictures of Odysseus and they had pictures of Achilles on their tombs, right? It was like this was like part of their lives. And now when, my grandfather died, when it said in his obituary he was a lifelong Red Sox fan. And people say that now too, right? It's like an important thing. And even at Wrigley sometimes people have been known to sprinkle some of someone's ashes like over the outfield wall on onto the warning track, right? So I think it does, even beyond the life, it's part of who people are.
I'm not going to say whether or not my wife has instructions for how to get my ashes on Dodger Stadium's field after I'm gone. It might be in the will. I'm not saying either way. What are some of the things that you learned while researching this book and writing this book? You had the idea going into it, so I'm sure there were a lot of things that you knew. But what's something that really took you by surprise when you were putting together this book?
Well, I mean, one part of it. I mean, the book started with my baby, with my daughter, right, being born, and it was published when she was 24, right? So a long time, a lot of things happen. And the greatest thing that happened in the course of all that, which kind of like brought my book to a close. So the book is 9 innings plus one extra. And I talk about the classic virtues, and I talk about, how myths are tragic or comic or beautiful or sublime. And then there's this one extra chapter. It's called, and it's extra innings. So 9 innings plus one extra. And that's because Aristotle, when he describes how people are happy, they only can be happy if they get something extra. Like he says, you should pursue virtue. You should try to be a good person, do everything that excellent. So when you find yourself at the right place at the right time, you like Dave Roberts can like do the right thing, right? But so much in life, virtue is only its own reward. In order to like win, in order to actually be happy, you need that extra, the ball needs to bounce your way. You need like a little bit of luck. And the thing that happened for me in the writing of this book, of course, is like the Cubs won the World Series. And so it all culminates in the Cubs won the World Series. And I had to, get my mind around what is this euphoria of how did that occur? And there was an interesting, when the Cubs won, there was there was a parade like outside my door of 5 million people. And previously, the only time 5 million people gathered together was like the Pope saying Mass in Manila or the funeral of the Ayatollah Khomeini. It was like these religious things where people would come together and testify their faith, right? But for the Cubs, 5 million people get together and everyone's looking at each other and they say, I can't believe it. It was like a test of me. It's like we were there saying like, I can't believe this, but I'm happy. Did this really, really happen? So that was a big thing that occurred. The other aspect of it is I was working with my editor, and we were working on the chapter on temperance, on the idea of how you temper yourself, how you make your best reactions how you make your best actions into reactions, how a ball player or a person, creates habits that make them not just someone who does good things occasionally, but does them all the time. So when they're fielding, when they don't do what they're supposed to do, then it's an error. She said, you talk about temperance, but it would be helpful for the reader to understand what it would mean to like lose your temper. Do you have any, can you reflect on that? And I just, and I had been just, keeping a journal, and I went back and I found this moment when, because Lou Piniella had been the, the manager for the Cubs at one point, and I had this great long thing in my journal about Cecilia and I be at the game and Lou Piniella just losing it and taking it out on the umpires. One of these like great moments. And actually, they were playing against the Braves, and Bobby Cox was in the other dugout, and so who actually has the record for the most being thrown out of a game for losing their temper and arguing. And so it was great that when she said that, I said, "Oh yeah, I have it," and I just cut it, paste it, boom, it was there and it kind of fit. So I feel like the book really grew organically from just and I had the time. I mean, this was sort of like definitely a passion project. My other writings had all been, academic in the study of religion, and this is one that I'm hoping everyone will love.
So you live in Chicago, you're a Chicago baseball fan, you study religion, and now we have a pope who is a baseball fan. Like, there has never been a better moment for your type of analysis of baseball than the time that the Pope was at the 2005 World Series. And that has to be so surreal for most people. But when you wrote this book, for somebody like you who has studied religion and then has put together this book, it must seem completely natural for somebody who has dedicated his life to religion and to baseball to sort of be the same type of person.
Yeah, no, that was a great moment when he was named, for a lot of reasons, but when he was named Pope, and the Cubs kind of jumped the gun and like claimed him as a Cubs fan, which is like very actually typical of the Cubs. But then he is a White Sox fan, and I love hearing in the recent World Series, AJ Przinsky was talking about like the Pope knows who I am, right? How perfect is it? Like, that the Pope, I don't, because Chicago's Polish population is so great. Of course, the Pope knows who AJ Brzezinski is. It's like it's the most perfect thing. I do attribute all the Bears' recent success to the Pope's prayers. I think that must have something to do with it. But that's I think you know when you think about, because I was thinking about your podcast and the Irish and baseball and how um, different immigrants come to America and assimilate. There's a lot of testimony about how baseball is a thing that allows them to, it's like when you can follow baseball, you are an American, right? There's an aspect of baseball that
Right.
makes you like culturally an American, whether it be DiMaggio or Boggs or whoever, right? People look at them and they say, yes, that's one of us, and we play the game too.
I want to get back to you mentioning how the Cubs jumped the gun by claiming the Pope was a Cubs fan. And then he came out, he said he was a White Sox fan. And then almost immediately, I saw Cubs fans wearing t shirts that said, okay, maybe he's not a Cubs fan, but at least he's no longer a Cardinal.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. The t-shirt makers are definitely. I mean, I have a few Pope jerseys already, White Sox jerseys with the Pope thing. You just can't beat that, right? I mean, that's too good. We're gonna own him forever.
Christian Sheppard, author of The Ancient Wisdom of Baseball. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Irish Baseball Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.